wanted to start by acknowledging that we're meeting here tonight on Aboriginal land. This land was stolen, it was never ceded. The land where we are at the moment belongs to the Gadigal people, and we stand in solidarity with their struggles day in, day out, to be recognised, to have their land returned, and to actually live decent lives without attacks from the state on a constant basis. I was getting off the train today and an Aboriginal man was yelling out, "He looked like an Abo, ran like an Abo, so we tasered him." And I'm like, no. And then he said, no, but he wasn't really. He was actually Brazilian. He was commenting on that case at the moment of the man who was killed by having 14 tasers shot into him. But this is what Aboriginal people deal with all the time, so we continue to stand in solidarity with them. And of course the comrades alongside me have done so for many years as well. And we are all extremely happy to have the legendary Jack Mundey with us here tonight. As well, our comrade Jerome, who's come up from Melbourne, Jerome Small, who's a member of Socialist Alternative and our industrial organiser. But just to begin, I wanted to let you know how things are going to work tonight. So I'll do the introductions, introduce Jack, and then later Jerome in more depth. Jack will speak first, then Jerome, and then we'll have some opportunities for you guys to ask your questions, because I'm sure you will have many. After that, there will be a launch of the Marxism Conference, which is our fantastic conference that happens down in Melbourne over the Easter long weekend, and then we can eat, drink and be merry. There will be food available at the kitchen behind us in the hallway back here, where also the toilet is, and there's only one of them, so please don't hang on too long. So, my name's Heidi Claus, I'm a teacher. I'm a first year out teacher, and I'm really suffering under, the attacks that are happening at the moment. I have several of my comrades from the Teachers Federation here tonight, so it's fantastic to see them. And with $1.7 billion being slashed out of public education by the O'Farrell government, I really would like to see my union standing up and fighting this. Well, at the moment we've had one strike this year, only one. I keep hearing that teachers are always striking. Well, so far we're not, and we really need to, I think. We will be having a huge community rally on November the 18th. It's a Sunday. So yes, I am striking in my own time, but I still want to see all of you there. And I keep being told by the senior officers in my union that, we can't go on strike all the time. We get fined, all these fines. We could get deregistered. And I keep thinking, hang on, you're not Jack Mundey. And this is not the Builders Labourers Federation. The teachers aren't going to get deregistered anytime soon, so I'd really like to hear from Jack about his experiences of deregistration. One of them more successful than the other. But that's to come. So, Jack Mundey, the legend, what can I say? If he's standing in front of bulldozers on Victoria Street in the Cross, saving low-income housing, or shutting down building sites around the country, standing up for women's rights. Jack Mundey and the Builders Labourers Federation and his comrades, they really left us a legacy that we hopefully can learn a lot from. So, without listening to me babble on anymore, Jack Mundey.
Thanks very much for inviting me. I think it's always a bit of a risk when you invite an old bloke, 82 going on 83 next week, to come and talk. And Joshua is to blame for that. He drove me bloody mad for a couple of hours. But really, I'm serious. There comes a time when, while I've enjoyed the unity of the working class and all the fights that have gone on, there comes a time when even speaking like this is difficult. And yet you go back 30, 40, 50 years, and of course I'd speak underwater. And it's also very difficult. I didn't think there'd be somebody here today with my good friends from the ABC as well. But and I was going to walk down memory lane a bit about left unity, the importance of it, of left unity. And I'm glad that, and this company here tonight, that Bob Gould and others up there in heaven are looking down and seeing Jack Mundey at a Trotskyist organiser. Hey Bob. I suppose the thing that the Builders Labourers became best known about was the success of the green bands. And I think that the Puritans in the union movement at the time when we took action were saying we're just dupes of the middle upper class. And yet I think when you look back, that period the green bands brought together the enlightened working class and the enlightened middle class in action. And I think the lesson from that is that in the day when we want more the unity than ever before, when the density of the union has shrunk so much that you really got about 15 to 20% of workers in unions. And yet when you think back to the period when I was in the union, we had 95, almost 100% of builders labourers in the union. And all the unions in that period of the 60s and 70s and 80s, you're looking at 60 or 70% of workers in unions. So it's really a really big problem for the working class, and we need all the unity we can of the left to bring about a change and fight for density and rebuild the union movement. That's the clarion call. When I started in the building industry, and again, as I said before, you've got to watch old blokes, let them loose, but I think it's worth looking back. And in the early 50s, when I came down from far north Queensland with stars in my eyes to play rugby league for Parramatta, I never got past reserve grade, and got caught up, of course, because I didn't have a trade. I got caught up in the Builders Labourers Union. And the Builders Labourers Union was a thug outfit. It was run by criminal types, and they worked hand in glove with the employers. And workers got smashed up. In 1 year I had 16 different jobs in a year. No sooner would they find out that militants were on the job, they were sacked. And so there was the building boom of the 60s changed all that. In fact, in Sydney now, when you look at the skyline in Sydney, in the 1955-56, the tallest building in Sydney was a Cullawalla Chambers, a 12-storey building down near Wynyard Station. And then they lifted the height limit and the sky became the limit. And it was in that period when things changed. First of all, the conditions in the union was deplorable. In 1 year, 14 dogmen and riggers were killed when the heights of building went up, and the conditions were so bad that they were killed, and many, many more were injured. And so in that period we built the union, and I think that the reason we built it was a number of really important principles. We had all the officials had got the same wages as workers on the job, exactly the same wages. We introduced a limited tenure of office, so we've seen where union militants come in, with the passage of years, things change, and they become too close to the employing class. And it was a very critical decision we made to have limited tenure of office. And after all union officials who had to be elected, after 2 terms, they should relinquish their power and go back to the rank and file. And that caused a lot of divisions within the left wing as well of the union.
Sorry, Jack.
But I think that, again, we don't want to talk too much about the old time, but in that period when we civilised the union and gave the workers dignity, most of the workers in the building industry in those days were migrant workers, because it was just during the first influx of migrants coming into the country. Many of them were labourers, and at one stage we had 15 different nationalities in the Builders Labourers Union. And at mass meetings we used to have interpreters interpreting to anything up to a dozen different things. We had organisers from Greek, Italian, Portuguese, all the major groups, we had organisers from them. So we built a situation where the rank and file and the leadership were looked upon as one, and it broke down that barrier between the union officials and the rank and file. And I think that was a very important lesson for the Builders Labourers Union. Of course, I went into all the divisions that occurred with with Gallagher and what happened in the Builders Labourers Union, well, we'd be here till about 11 o'clock tomorrow. But it was very unfortunate because I think the lesson of the Builders Labour, one of the lessons, is a question of left unity. And in many ways, Gallagher in the early, for those that don't know, he was a leader of the Builders Labourers in Victoria and followed the Chinese line of the Communist Party. And then up here in New South Wales you had Pat Clancy and Tom MacDonald who followed the Soviet Union. And then you had me on the correct line. And each country got to find its own way to socialism based on the history, culture and tradition of the country. But I just say that in many ways those organisations worked together. All of them were militants. And then of course besides that you had many Trotskyist organisations and other socialists who also had a viewpoints as part of the left. And left unity has always been a big problem with the trade union movement. In some ways it's good. I said we've got to have differences. We're not saying that there can't be differences. But I think also we've got to then say what's a cut-off point when you're fighting the capitalist class, when you're fighting corporations that even changed capitalism since that period. And I think that because we sort of humanised the union, civilised the union, gave the workers dignity, we fought for a number of other things. I remember when Nelson Mandela came here, he thanked the unions for the work they'd done against the fight against apartheid. But he said that the unions in Australia were at the forefront, and all that got covered, so much coverage in South Africa that it played a part in it. The Builders Labourers also had first women working in an all-male enclave. Women fought to come into the union. We employed, and the first time we did it. The gays, for example, the Builders Labourers took action to force the employers. When they sacked Jeremy Fisher on Macquarie University, the workers stopped work on Macquarie University. A lot of work was taking place then. And they stopped them and forced the university authorities to reinstate Jeremy Fisher in that job. Well, first day. New South Wales University, or Sydney University, Anne Curthoys and Elizabeth Jacker, two women, the Women's Social Liberation, were kicked out because they were members of the Women's Liberation. We forced the university, the Builders Labourers stopped work and forced the university authorities to reinstate them. So on the gay question, on women's social liberation, they played a part. Aborigine, when the Aborigine stockmen went on strike in the Northern Territory, we brought the striking stockmen down, Dexter Daniels and Captain Mate, took them around the jobs to educate the Builders Labourers about the plight of our first people. And in fact, Dexter Daniels was so keen on it, he was hard to get him to go back to the Northern Territory. he liked talking, but that played a part. That played a very important part in bringing the working class in the cities to what was happening. So, and of course, the opposition of the Vietnam War was sort of one of the greatest highlights of the trade union movement, of the progressive trade union movement in the 60s and the 70s. And I think it's for the everlasting credit of the left wing of the trade union movement, that they played a decisive part in together when Whitlam came to power, of extricating us from the most sordid history of Australia's history in the Vietnam War. I think that the Builders Labourers now are sort of best known, I guess, because of the green bands, and now it's with Pat Fisk in that marvellous documentary, Rocking the Foundations, has captured that, and those who haven't seen it should see it, Rocking the Foundations, because it's a marvellous history of workers, of middle-class women going down in front of the bulldozers and then enlisting the Builders Labourers and other unions to come in and link up in the unique middle working class action that saved Kelly's Bush, saved the Rocks, saved Centennial Park. Who would now suggest that Centennial Park be turned into a giant sports stadium? But that was what Askin wanted in the 1960s. He were going to, in the faint hope we might have got the Olympic Games in 1988. In 1972 they were prepared to destroy Centennial Park to build the universe for sporting activity, so as that they could go to the International Olympic Authority and say, we've done this already. And of course Patrick White linked up again with the people who, or the well-to-do people in the eastern suburbs, linked up, came to the Builders Labourers. A big meeting was held in the town hall, and the green band on Centennial Park is the reason Centennial Park is there today. A lot of people don't know that. Centennial Park could have been ruined. In the course of 5 years, 42 green bands were introduced, and they were holding up something like 10,000 million, now millions. So it's changed so much over the years, how many millions were caught. But that was a wonderful action by people who were sick and tired of people just running over them. And whereas before that, the building industry was flat out keeping workers in work, when the boom came on, of course, you had the other extreme, where buildings that were good were being knocked down, and high-rise buildings were going up higher and higher, and the working class were often not getting housing. So we fought for public housing, and the first public housing that came in because of the connection of the union movement linking up and forcing the Labor government. For example, the first heritage legislation brought in by Neville Wren. Neville Wren himself later on acknowledged that it was the grassroots position, the resident action groups linking up with the progressive trade unions, that brought about the change, that set the pace so as he could then introduce heritage action. So, of course, from that time on, we've seen it, it's improved, but now, of course, it's eternal vigilance is required, because now with this government in, the Labor government was bad, state Labor government was bad enough, but with this government in, we're going to see more and more of our history under threat. Well, most those people in the hall here tonight know that history of it, and I think it's just me walking down memory lane to a bit too much about that. But I think on some of the environment, the way the green bands, I was invited both to the United States and Europe because of the green bands. The green bands attracted worldwide attention. Paul Ehrlich and Barry Commoner, who died just recently, were champions of the green band. They went back to the United States and tried to get the unions there to do the same thing that they were here. They weren't very successful, apparently, but they did. Spike Milligan, the wonderful old Spike Milligan, when he came out, his mother lived here, and he came out and he saw what was going on. And when he went back to Birmingham, they were going to knock down the post office. And I was on a lecture tour of England at the time. And we went up there and we got the building workers and we saved the Birmingham post office. So we even exported the green band. I think that, I'm not going far enough, I think that the environment movement now, if we go into the 20th century, I think we'd have to say that both socialism and capitalism failed the 20th century. Both failed to see the question of ecology as central. And in the 21st century, ecology is going to be the most important political issue facing humankind.
Yes.
It's clearly now, with global warming and with all the other problems, unless we find a way to harmonise with nature, the future is very grim indeed. And so I think that if we say that, if we can harmonise with nature, well, ecological socialism is a possibility, if we can do that. If it's just on growth, with corporations getting bigger and worse than ever, well then who can be confident that humanity can survive, and let alone other species? So I think that the green bands, that period, opened up the question of working class people linking up with middle class and other classes to come together and fight for them. And that's why I think that the Greens and the Labor Party are still very important. In today's are very important. The Socialist movement or Communist Party, I don't think exists, or might be a couple of varieties. The Socialists, as we know, There's a whole number of them, all doing good work, most of them doing good work. But the question of left unity is still not on the agenda, is it? And that's the sort of thing we've got to fight for. So I think that, seeing that I was talked into talking here today, I think I might make this my swan song and say that this is, so my life has been very interesting in the sense that I changed from just being concerned about the working class alone, being concerned about ecology and environment and wider things. And I think that the union movement is going to be really meaningful. It's got to continue that path as well, and also building the base of the left-wing unions, bringing them together. Because unity is never easy to get, and unity has to be fought for. And therefore, I think, Joshua, you got me here, I've made my speech, and thanks very much for having me.
Thank you, Jack. But I'd like to introduce now Jerome Small. Jerome Small has come up from Melbourne. He's part of Socialist Alternative, has been involved since 1991. We were just discussing it beforehand. So he's been a revolutionary for a long time and fought a lot of hard campaigns. He's currently also a rank and file member of the CFMEU down in Melbourne. He's Socialist Alternative's industrial organiser, and he's going to speak today about some of the struggles going on today.
Well, the topic is building fighting unions, and I should say at the outset, I don't have the easy 6-point plan that will apply in every situation in every union. If there is such a thing, please someone let me know. But I think that there are some general principles which I'll try to illustrate in my remarks tonight. Before I get going on them though, I should say a few words about myself. Just to make clear, as Heidi mentioned, I'm a rank and file member of the CFMEU and a very proud one. When I got the flick from my beloved employer some time ago, due to my union activities, after a few months Socialist Alternative approached me to be industrial organiser, so I've still got 2 tickets at the moment, I suppose. But I do want to make it clear, if there's any snitches here from the Fair Work Building Commissioner or whatever, if I happen to remark that one of the fundamental democratic rights, you know, of any human being should be to withdraw their labour, and that any law that stops people from doing this deserves to be defied en masse and repeatedly, well, you can sue me. Don't worry about suing the CFMEU. So, as I'll talk about, the CFMEU being sued for doing exactly that, you know, not just saying it. The other thing, of course, I want to say at the outset is what an absolute privilege it is to be here on a platform with Jack Mundey. Yesterday I was talking to a very dear friend of mine, Davey Thomason, down in Melbourne. He gave me a call. He knew I was doing this for him. Davey jumped off a ship. He's from the Shetland Islands, off the coast of Scotland. He was a seafarer, jumped off the ship in Sydney. Ended up working on the Opera House, worked his way around Sydney, and ended up as Jack Mundey's youngest organiser, in fact. And still to this day, as well as having a very young family, he manages to get himself around the construction industry in Melbourne. And every branch meeting of the CFMEU down there, he's getting up talking about Aboriginal rights, talking about the environment, talking about how these aren't just some add-on extra thing, they should be fundamental union business, talking about the need for militancy, and especially talking about the need for the rank and file to assert themselves. And he wanted me to pass on to the meeting and to Jack tonight the fact that his experience in Sydney of being part of that living, breathing, working class movement that made such an impact at the time, and the impact of which you can still see when you walk around the streets of Sydney, being part of that is something that has motivated him and given him energy every day since then, you know, all of the 40 years since that time. And I guess along the way, a little bit of it managed to rub off on me as well. I still remember the profound impact as in my late teenage years. I saw the documentary that Jack mentioned, Rocking the Foundations, and this totally hidden history, you know, of how it was like the scales fell from my eyes, you know, the fact that thousands upon thousands of supposedly ordinary working class people could decide en masse. We are not donkeys, we are not robots, we are not factors of production in someone's ledger sheet. We are human beings, and we will decide how our labour is used. You know, the thing that makes us human, our ability to transform the world, you know, won't just be some commodity to be bought and sold and paid by the hourly rate. We will decide how it's used, and that, you know, that really has stayed with me. And you know, the examples, the small examples that I've seen of that throughout my life, even if it's, you know, just for an afternoon, for a day, of that, you know, fact of working class power has really stayed with me as well. Okay. I guess some of that spirit has been seen a fair bit around the construction industry, especially on the eastern seaboard recently. People might have heard about the victory won just last week by 600 striking construction workers at the Queensland Children's Hospital site up in Brisbane, who, in defiance of, you know, according to the courts, every industrial law known to humankind, walked down on strike for the very simple principle of, you know, everyone actually getting the same rate, you know, bosses not being able to compete by offering ever lower bids and, you know, shortchange workers and so on. The entire site walked out on illegal strike, were ordered back to work, told the courts, you know, where they could put their injunctions, and you know, and was it more than 6 weeks? It was 9 weeks. Thank you, Diane. 9 weeks later, have marched back in with a guarantee that that situation will be fixed. So, you know, that's certainly that same sort of spirit. We've seen that same sort of fighting spirit at Lend-Lease. This is protected industrial action. One of the rare occasions, if you jump through the right hoops, then you might be able to perhaps take lawful industrial action in this country. And the CFMEU, to its enormous credit, nationally used this little window of legal opportunity to maximum effect, and have managed to, you know, people were, I'm sure here, were on the CFMEU picket line, especially at Barangaroo, just down the road here, and managed to win back some of the things like side allowances and so on that had been lost in the 90s. And of course we've seen it, thank you, and of course we've seen it down in Melbourne, where I spent, you know, really 3 weeks, you know, the happiest time of my 13 years in the CFMEU was down every morning on the picket line outside the son Daniel Grollo's massive construction site in Lonsdale Street, Melbourne. And I wanted to spend a little bit of time talking about this because I've been told that it didn't really make it into the news much up in Sydney, whereas it certainly made the news in Melbourne. The fundamental issue at stake at Grollo, and it was basically a 3-week blockade of, you know, the biggest construction site in Melbourne. The fundamental issue at stake was union representation. And for a lot of the press and the people that prattle around on the ABC and all the rest of it, it was just like, oh, this is some trivial issue. Why are we even talking about this? And for anyone who's spent any time in construction, you know, it is far from a trivial issue. You know, if you've worked, you know, been asked to work on a 15-metre drop, you know, taking off the handrail, and you ask the foreman, so once I take the handrail off, what's to stop me falling down there? And he looks at you like you're stupid, you know, and you say, well, no, I'm not doing that. You know that the only protection that you've got in taking that stand is strong union representation. I've been in situations where there's been serious, you know, like really serious accidents happen on site where it is, you know, it's a miracle that a man hasn't been killed. When the meeting happens the next day, every single person is too shit scared, basically, to stand up, you know, because they're afraid of being sacked, to stand up and say anything until, you know, me and a couple of collaborators see the red mist in front of our eyes and, you know, go berserk and whatever. But, you know, again, you know, we can only survive doing that sort of thing because of the union representation on site. So it is, you know, it is literally a matter of life and death, of life and limb, you know, as well as of dignity. So it's a very important issue. Daniel Grollo is the head of an $800 million company called Grocon. He reckons he can do it all without the union, and he's been sort of working his way around the union, running his sites with basically standover men as supposed safety representatives for the last decade or more. It got to a point in Melbourne where, you know, the union got to a point, it seems, where they couldn't just, you know, lean on the developer or work around him or ignore it anymore. He had a whole bunch of the, you know, the very biggest jobs starting in the centre of Melbourne, and the union basically decided to draw a line. And so I found myself down on the picket line you know, standing in, you know, and again in apparent defiance of every industrial law that had ever been passed, saying, no, enough is enough, we've drawn the line, there will be no production here until our demands are met, until the workers have decent representation, until they have a health and safety rep, until they are allowed to turn up to a Grollo site with a union sticker on their hat and not get sent to another job or sacked, you know, just for wearing that union sticker. This is what was going on. So things dragged on for a few days. On the 28th of August, there was this massive build-up of police, and it was pretty clear that, you know, he was going to try to get his site working again. And you know, it was one of the most inspiring mornings of my life to see, with every change of the lights, we basically got a new, you know, platoon of, you know, guys in fluoro jackets and women as well, you know, coming down to be part of the resistance and to say, no, you know, this picket line will not be broken today. And, you know, I've been around the traps, I've been trampled by police horses, I've been battened, all the rest of it, but to see, you know, the full cavalry charge by Victoria Police, the full ground assault by riot cops with shields and batons and capsicum spray and all the rest of it, turned around in literally, like maybe 40 seconds, you know, by this solid wall of construction workers just, like that was it, you know, and that reality of power, of, you know, just demonstrating in practice, no, you can't build a building with riot cops or cops on horses or, you know, Supreme Court judges, you know, they don't drive forklifts, they don't run cranes, you know, legal writs aren't going to get this moving, you know, it's us, you know, we the rank and file will decide whether this job works or not, and on that day it didn't. And for the you know, 10 days that followed that, every morning, you know, even when I was working, I wasn't getting up so early in the morning. But, you know, every morning there would be hundreds and hundreds, thousands of rank and file construction workers making their way down there. And that feeling of power, I mean, it's not hard to work out why it's pretty addictive, because we grow up in this society, and from that tall, you know, we're told we don't have any say. We don't have any say over, you know, even the most basic things that happen in our community. We don't have any say over the things that happen in our working lives. We don't have any say over, you know, what we do with our labour. You know, we don't have any say at all. You know, you're just meant to be here to make profit for someone else. That's basically, for most of us, most of our working lives, that's what it's about. And to have, you know, the reality, even just for a few minutes, you know, to demonstrate that, no, we can be the power, you know, that can, like I've been saying, it's certainly what got Davey Thomason hooked, it's what got me hooked, and it's obviously what got thousands of rank and file construction workers in Melbourne hooked as well. So, okay, so all of that, in terms of the dispute now, yeah, like I've probably spent enough time on it. Basically, Daniel Grollo swore black and blue, no, you know, I'll never talk to the union, doesn't matter if you lift the blockade, doesn't matter if you lift the blockade indefinitely, I'll never talk to you unless you absolutely guarantee that never in 100 years will you ever put another blockade on any single one of my sites. This is what Daniel Grollo was saying all through it. After 3 weeks of blockades, he basically said, maybe we should talk. Now, those talks have been going on. The word around the industry and even in the press now is basically that they've, you know, they've turned to crap. You know, the public line from our State Secretary, Bill Oliver, right from the start was, well, if these talks don't work, you know, you'll know where to find us, back on Lonsdale Street. So, like, you know, there's all sorts of ins and outs. Like I say, I'm rank and file, but, you know, watch this space. The dispute certainly isn't over yet. Okay. In terms of, I guess that was a sort of long way around to say, you know, if there was a 6-point plan, point number 1 would be actually struggle, you know, and that sounds struggle rather than, you know, class collaboration, and that sounds like a pretty obvious thing to say, perhaps in this room especially, but actually that's been pushing against the grain for the last, what, 20, 30 years since we signed the Accord? Since someone signed the Accord? You know, like that whole picture of retreat and defeat that has led to the sort of situation that Jack talked about, where we have, you know, a decreasing percentage. You know, it's been based on, you know, we can do the deal. We'll just put up shiny black shoes under the table, we'll negotiate with the boss, we'll take the best offer, you know, all the rest of it. Like, you know, point number 1 for any strategy for rebuilding fighting unions has to be saying no. It has to be based on struggle rather than collaboration. one of the second points, I suppose, would be defiance. And this is not to say that, you know, basically, unless you're breaking every industrial law known to man and beast, then, you know, you're just not serious. Like, you know, you do have to pick and choose your times. You do have to, you know, there's all sorts of strategy and tactics. But at the end of the day, you cannot let the courts and the media and the government dictate the terms on which we fight. You know, and you know, there's certainly plenty. If you look through the history of the Builders Labourers Federation, of any of the unions that have made, you know, decent gains, they've done it absolutely in the teeth of you know, the courts and the media and so on. I did meant to show you actually the sort of Exhibit A. This is the sort of stuff, like I mentioned, that this is back on the Grollo dispute. The Grollo dispute was big news in Melbourne. This is the day after, because basically you're not allowed to feel that good. You're not allowed to feel that powerful in a capitalist society. So, you know, one of the biggest businesses in town, News Limited, the Herald Sun the next day, for people that can't see, Watchdog says bikies, thugs hijack work sites. Reign of fear and intimidation grows. Hell to ransom. That's page 1, right? Then you manage to get, you know, the whatever, you know, like a couple of pages of actual news, and then it's, you know, criminals hijack city sites. You think this guy's going to be the biggest criminal mastermind. It turns out, well, sort of he is the head of the state government anti-union task force down in Victoria, Nigel Hadgkiss. To build his there. Then a couple more pages, shocking revelations about the CFMEU. And then a page of ads, another page of news. And then you get Daniel Grollo himself being basically given 2 pages to claim that his sites are the safest in Australia and we will not be beaten by thugs. And then you get whole, you know, rivers of stuff in the letters as well. Just on, yeah. Look, I do have to say, Daniel Grollo, the fact that he's allowed to claim in the media and that no one questions it, that he's got the safest sites in Australia, it tells you something about, well, it tells you something about the media, that this isn't challenged. You just take a look at that site we're blockading in Lonsdale Street, $800 million company, he can't seem to afford a single bar cap. You know, these are these cheap little plastic things that there's a bit of reinforcing steel sticking out of the concrete, and you put a little bar cap on, so if you fall on it, you know, it doesn't really seriously injure you. You know, I don't know how much they cost, 20 cents or something. Like, you know, he can't seem to afford any of them. So anyway, this is the sort of stuff that was going on. All of this, you know, like as soon as we let these people dictate the terms, basically we've lost. So defiance is the other thing. Solidarity would be the third point. And I was actually in a meeting yesterday with there was a union official who was sort of saying, look, the problem is that our members are selfish, you know, we can't get them to do anything because they're so selfish. To which my response was, well, like, solidarity is the most selfish thing out. You know, like, I think I'm an extremely selfish person. I'm in it for me. It's just that I know that I can't win unless you win, and unless you win, and unless you win. You know, and that seems to have been the motivating factor, you know, behind a lot of the sort of struggles that Jack Mundey and the New South Wales BLF were involved in as well, realising, and it's historically true, we all go forward together or we go back together. The time in this country, in the modern history, where we all made the most gains, was when workers were going forward, when the anti-war movement was going forward, when women's, when gays, when blacks, when the environment movement. That time in the early 70s, they were all going forward together. In the 80s, they all got co-opted together. In the 90s, we all pretty much got smashed together. You know, so it's not just some nice socialist phrase, it is actually the historical truth. We go forward together or we go back together. We have to recognise that, and that's the point of solidarity. Fourth point, I suppose, is politics. And obviously the most powerful forces in our society, you know, work very hard to, you know, to stop people from finding their own collective power, to stop ordinary, so-called ordinary people finding our own collective power. And there's a great little pamphlet, well, Jack Mundey's book actually is really worth a read, and he talks about some of the early years of the rank and file movement in the Builders Labourers Federation, you know, sort of, you know, like the really hard work that went in before the green bands. Everyone knows, and it's great that you know, more and more people know the story of the green bands. What very few people know is the sheer hard slog that went on for decades before that by, you know, very small numbers of militants. And initially, you know, Paul True's book, Rolling the Right, it gives this fantastic description of, you know, this little rank and file group sets up in 1951. There's about, I think, 5 of them. They're all communists. They, you know, as Jack was saying, the union's run basically by gangsters and standover men and so on, and they start, you know, talking to some of the better stewards and talking about the need to build up the rank and file. After 18 months, they call a meeting and 15 people turn up, you know. By 1958, like that's after what, 7 years of solid rank and file activity, they're confident enough to actually stand in an election. And there's all sorts of backs and, you know, like doing work on the job, getting your little victories on the job, finding out who the decent stewards are, recruiting them to the rank and file group, getting this, what was it called, the Hoist, this little newsletter out to the jobs, you know, getting news around the different jobs and all the rest of it. You know, and people getting demoralised, thinking, God, we're getting nowhere. Our members are getting bashed on sight by these gangsters and, you know, having to find strategies to overcome that. All of that really hard work, you know, like the backbone of it was people, you know, such as, there was a lot of, you know, increasing number of people involved with all sorts of different politics, but absolutely central to it was people like Jack Mundey with the Communist Party or some other sort of, you know, left-wing party card in their back pocket. And, you know, despite all the various differences and whatever, like an emphasis on, you know, the workers have to be the basis of it, and actually having some sort of vision that we can do better than this, you know, that we're not just donkeys, that we're not just robots. Like, that politics was really crucial, as far as I can understand the history, to keeping people going. The other factor that comes into that, of course, is just sheer bloody persistence. Like, you know, all of those years of hard work that, you know, Jack and his comrades put in before they contested elections, let alone before they won elections and so on. You know, if we're going to get disheartened at the first setback in rebuilding fighting unions, well, you know, there's not much prospect. It is a pretty hard slog from where we are now. And I guess the final thing of my 6-point plan would be the rank and file. There was an old, I don't know whether you guys used it, Jack, but I remember reading a history of the Miners' Federation back in the 30s, and the Communist Party, when they were you know, agitating in the rank and file and rebuilding that union after the Great Depression, had this phrase, or this sort of slogan, make every member an activist. You know, and every member that you can recruit to your, you know, rank and file group or whatever, you know, is so vitally important. And having that emphasis is something that certainly, you know, as Jack said, the BLF had right through, you know, like in terms of mass meetings, in terms of, you know, limiting the power of the officials, the tenure even of the officials, of promoting the rank and file, and saying, you know, that the rank and file are the union. Okay. So, I guess to finish up, I'll come back to where I started and just say, you know, how rapt I am to be standing alongside Jack Mundey, because, you know, in practice he has shown, and not just him, you know, all of his comrades, you know, in the New South Wales BLF at that time, have shown that through solidarity, through defiance, through having some sort of anti-capitalist politics which you stick to, you know, that gives you some sort of different vision, you know, through putting an emphasis on the rank and file, and through sheer bloody-minded persistence, you know, if we stick to those sorts of principles, we can see that so-called ordinary people are capable of absolutely extraordinary things. So thank you.
Great. Well, if anyone has any questions that you'd like to ask Jack, Jerome, please raise your hands. And let's finish up by giving another warm round of applause and gratitude.